God morgon och välkomna tillbaka till er som var med oss igår också, och välkomna hit ni som har kommit idag. Det här är ju ett seminarium om flerspråkighet och på flera språk, and now I will switch into English. I am very happy to introduce to you Associate Professor in English, Johanna Enser-Kananen. And I learned yesterday that I know that you have your background in Austria. You were born in Austria. But I learned that you came to Finland 18 years ago?
10.
Yeah.
10, yeah.
And you've been living in Boston,
yep.
Minneapolis, South Africa, and perhaps some more places.
Malta.
Malta, yeah. And we invited Johanna because we know that she is engaged in research about epistemological and social justice, multilingualism, especially in educational contexts. And Johanna also applies decolonial perspectives, intersectional and non-white perspectives in her research. Yesterday we had one of our themes, it was about publication and academic publishing. And I had a glance this morning and I noticed that you are extremely productive. So just in 2024-25, you have published more than 10.
Oh, really?
Yes,
I
yes you do.
Great.
And it's both in Finnish and in English. And you have been co-editing a book that is Language and Social Justice, an Introduction to Linguistic Activism. And perhaps that is a little bit tied to what you are going to talk about today. I also noticed that you very often co-author your things, and with different people. Yeah. So you seem to have a very large network. Yeah. I know that you are interested in Swedish, but perhaps don't talk so much. No. You understand?
I understand a little, yeah.
So let's do this in your way, our way, today. And I also noticed, and last thing I want to mention is that I noticed that you have a couple of projects that you are leading. And one of them is about academic well-being. So, welcome here.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
That's really kind introduction. Thank you. Hi everybody. Moi. Ja, tack för denna vänliga inbjudan. Jag är väldigt glad att vara här. And this is about it. But thank you so much for this really kind invitation. And I will talk about this well-being project a little bit, but I will say that I was not the lead on this. But it's really interesting to hear yourself from a different perspective. So thank you. Yeah. So my talk is titled "Multilingual at the University: Too Much and Not Enough." And I have to say that it's actually a talk about being a Finnish learner. So I have myself argued in some papers that there's a problem with reducing multilingual speakers to the one language that they're still learning, right? But it is from this perspective that I want to share my experience today and that of others, and from that perspective that I want to illustrate this experience of being too much and not enough. So as Åsa has already said, I have 10 years of experience of living this reality of being a Finnish learner in Finland. But I also actually haven't operated in my first language for almost 20 years because I haven't lived in my birth country for a really long time. So that comes with a certain, this feeling of not being fully yourself. That is kind of my second skin. But also I want to say that I am a migrant and I'm a Finnish learner, but also I'm a white European woman and all my languages have a lot of linguistic power and capital. And so I'm not, what I say is usually heard. Not always, but usually. But so I want to also acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege in this academic environment, and so it shelters me from a lot of discrimination, harassment, and structural injustices. So it's, I think, with this in mind that we have to go into this. So today I brought two stories for you, and the one is from a research project that I did with some people who are also in the room, Just making sure that credit goes to everybody here. And the second one is also a group project, but it's not really a research project, or not yet anyway. This is also why you will see real names and real faces. And so it's an experience. We'll see what happens. So, sorry, not yet. So from 2019 until very recently, some colleagues of mine here, who are listed here, so there was Mark Perkins and Petri Laihonen and Taina Saarinen, who is also here today. We studied well-being, and there was a larger project. We studied well-being of academics, and you know, when you study well-being, you also always study unwell-being. In all kinds of different ways. With a larger group, we also had physiological data, quantitative data, but then we also thought, okay, well-being, we also want to approach this differently. We had some arts-based workshops. We had Mark and Taina also did photography, and so after a while we analyzed the data from our arts-based workshops where people were drawing their unwell-being, and we were ready to put some data out into the world, and we thought, well, which language should we publish in? And and Mark and I, as Finnish learners, had experience of how this is usually done, right? So you write you work in a group. Some of them are Finnish first language users, and some of them aren't. And so you write your part in English. Somebody translates it, and then you kind of lose control over the text, because then it goes. Then it's edited and you don't really understand it anymore, and at this point you have to give up ownership, at least for a large part, and we didn't want to do this. And so I asked the very consequential question, well, could we write in simple Finnish? And so, spoiler right away, yes we can, and we did, and the article is, so the story here is not the result, right? So this is the result, it's there, we wrote it in simplified Finnish. You can access it here through the QR code if I'm not blocking your way. And it's there, and so the process was in that way successful. But I want to talk about how we got there today. And I will also say right away that we didn't write in Selkosuomi, which is its own system and has its own rules, but we wrote in what I think or thought back then was our Finnish. So Mark and I tried to write the clearest Finnish we can, and Mark and Taina and Petri helped us, and we negotiated a lot. So our goals with this whole thing were that we would enable continuous participation. So we wanted to produce an article that we don't lose ownership over. We wanted to be there every step of the way. And we wanted to also break barriers and brittle norms, so show that Finnish learners can and should participate in written Finnish academic discourse. And we thought that there was this glass ceiling that we wanted to break, and we were hoping that people would also follow us in this idea. And we wanted to show the world that our language is worth printing. And so it was also this act of empowerment. And we also wanted to communicate with new audiences, because we were figuring if we managed to establish a body of literature that is written in a simplified Finnish, then it would be more accessible to readers like us, who would also then read more in Finnish. And yeah, so this was kind of the dream, and somebody has to start, right? So we did. And we also found a journal that was willing to work with us, which was the Tietepolitiikka. So that was really generous of them that they were interested. And so we didn't really have a lot of rules to start with, except that we wanted to have a lot of negotiations. So it was a really negotiation-based approach, and we had writing meetings where we met online in an online space. We switched the cameras and microphones off for some hours, then this designated time came back together, and then we negotiated what we had written and how it should be. And so that actually went really, really well. But it also meant that the process was really slow, especially for Mark and I. We had also committed to not using translation apps, except if it was absolutely necessary. So a slow pace, as you probably know, is not really often supported in academia. It felt sometimes painful, because there were all these thoughts in my head like, if we could have written this in English, I could have written 2 articles in this time easily, right? Or is this really the best way to go about it? And so, but the group meetings were also good for that. The group was always there to say, okay, come back, remember our goals, remember we're doing this for a reason. This is going to be worth it in the end. So that was really great. But it was a bit of an act against also this academic hyperproductivity and speed. So to summarize the long process, we laughed a lot, we disagreed a lot, we agreed also a lot. We still have recordings from all our meetings, so we're probably still going to analyze them at some point. And we found a few things. We found what I call now negotiated boldness. So when you read the text, I'll give you an example in a second, you will feel that some of our statements are really bold. But this boldness is not impulsive or reckless. It's negotiated. Like, basically every word in this article is negotiated, but it's the result of the fact that in our level of Finnish, it wasn't always possible for us to hint at something or nod in a certain direction. You know, we sometimes had to really say things with our Finnish, and then they come out a bit more direct. And that also meant that we had to be very sure about what we actually wanted to say. So we had to for ourselves clarify what we actually wanted to say and also find a consensus in the group, and that was actually a really long process often. So here's, for example, this. So if you read this first sentence, hyvinvoinnista puhuminen on myös tapa, jolla työntekijöitä kontrolloidaan. So well-being discourses is also a way to control employees. This is maybe something in English I would mitigate it a bit and say something like, you know, well-being discourses can serve as a tool of hierarchizing and structuring academic organizations. And it sounds a bit softer, you know, but like, you know, we didn't have the tools, so it sounds like this. And so when you put yourself out like this, you also offer more of an attack surface to the readers, of course, because you're saying things quite straightforwardly. So that was one of the things we found. The other thing I would call nowadays complexity and simplicity. So many of the discourses that many of our discussions revolved about having to explain something. So sometimes, for example, we learned a word just for writing the article that we didn't know. One of the things that we learned was rakenteellinen epäoikeudenmukaisuus, or rakenteellinen asia, or something like this. So the structural, how do you say structural in Finnish? So this was actually one of the words we had to look up. And then we made this commitment that if we use a word that we learn, we will explain it in the text. We're not gonna, so that the readers also don't have to look it up. And so, so we explained the word, and then we also give an example for what it could be and what it means concretely. And this was really language and content learning together, right? Because you're not just explaining a vocabulary term, you're explaining a phenomenon. And so, so there was a lot of negotiating around what do these words actually mean, and what is a good example of this. And I think it's really fair to say that this was content and language. This was like clear for all 4 of us, and it was very intense often, and very took a long time. And I would say that, like, what we experienced here is maybe that this common conception of academic language didn't really work for us, because there's sometimes this, in these definitions, there's often this idea that complex language works with, you need complex language to express complex phenomena, and then you can use simple language for simple phenomena. But our difficulty just arose from the fact that we are trying to express complex phenomena in simple language. So it really put a dent into what this whole concept of academic language, which many people have said is actually, academic language is not a reality but an ideology. So I think that's how I would discuss it nowadays, that we were negotiating our languages, our ideologies, our histories, our socialization, and what seemed like writing in simple language was not simple at all. And it was joyful, sometimes it was funny, but it was also really exhausting. It was work. I want you to remember the word work because I'm going to come back to this. So I will give actually an example of what I mean, why I think it was so complex. Okay, so here you see us working. This is Dinah, this is Petteri, this is me, this is Mark. And this is from one of our meetings. And there's actually this one case that we still laugh about and still tease each other about and still discuss. And you may have guessed the case is about possessives, everybody's favorite Finnish grammatical structure. And so, so actually I must say that Dinah and Petteri were really great writing partners. They did not interfere much with our Finnish. But there was this one thing that we noticed that they kept correcting, that was our possessives. And so we thought, okay, we'll take this up. And so the suggestion was on the table pretty quickly that we should drop them, you know, they are redundant anyway. You have the possessive pronoun and then you have a suffix, like you need both, like it's perfectly understandable without. And so here's a little glimpse in our discussion. So this was the third hour of a 3-hour writing session in December 2023, and we had just switched our microphones and cameras back on, come together after everybody had written, and we immediately jumped in, and I had put a message in the chat while I was typing myself and said, just to warn you, possessives are taking a serious hit today. And so we came back, and we all immediately jumped into it, with Dinah saying, in her words, I'm having such an emotional reaction. And so in a humorous and very playful manner, as you can see, with lots of laughter and teasing and fairly strong language also, we all played our roles over the next 10 to 15 minutes. Dinah repeated that the dropping of possessives was going too far, and that this was where she had to, quote, draw the line, because we were, quote, destroying Finnish completely. And that possessive suffixes were, quote, such an integral part of my identity, so of her identity. And Petteri warned us that we will shock people if we do that, and adding that they are the most cherished thing in Finnish academia, or in academic Finnish, sorry, and that without them our paper would sound like teenagers talk. And he added that also to explain that possessives were something that we have learned, and something that often he corrects his kids on when they write essays for school. And then Mark jumped in to say, well, as a beginning language learner, they blow me the hell out of the water. They really do. And he suggested a compromise, that we could only use them in the nominative. But I was not having that, so I was like, no, I was pointing to the redundancy and taking particular offense at the fact that it took me forever to produce, and pointing also to the unnecessary complexity. And I said, in my words, the words already change all the time. Or as I said, it really doesn't add anything except a lot of pain on my end. So as you can see, the discussion was heated and also fun, but also heated. And also serious, actually. But this laughter, it was really collegiate and humorous, and and Dinah was adopting an exaggerated version of a language purist that she often very vocally criticizes in her own work, and we were all playing our roles. But this humor of the situation also allowed us to approach the topic slowly and dance around it a little bit. And as the laughter ebbed away a little, Dinah shared in a more serious part of the conversation that actually throughout her life, and especially schooling, she had experienced non-standard use of possessives as being a legitimate reason for linguistic shaming. So sports reporters, people who appear in the media, were legitimately shamed for doing this, and also in classrooms. And so, however, standard use of possessives indexed in Dinah's and Petteri's life reality, high educational status. So as a group, we were beginning to discover deeply ingrained and widely promoted language norms that we had worked and that continue to work as markers of educatedness or academic mindedness or elevated social status or intelligence even. So seen from this perspective, Mark and I, we felt like we were asking for so little, right? We just dropped the possessive, come on, it's not a big deal, right? But it was a seemingly small thing, but we were actually asking them to step away, even just a tiny bit, from a standard that they had been quite forcefully instilled in them and become normalized over time. And it had also served them really well. So in a sense, we asked them to drop one grammatical feature, at least partially. But what we really asked them was to let go of their intergenerationally built linguistic shame, or as jokingly expressed by Tallenne, if I have to suffer, everybody else has to. To give up their linguistic privilege that they had acquired through much and partially very painful work. We asked them to step out of their socialization and to disrupt an intergenerational chain of linguistic ideologies that they were about to perpetuate on us. And I think it's clear from this discussion how difficult all that is. What I still want to add to this situation is that not much was at stake for any of us in this situation, right? So letting go of this linguistic norm was not in any way threatening anybody's job or group membership or status or contract or access to resources or reputation as a scholar. So all of that was actually relatively secure. But there was a lot to win, namely to create access to scholars who have less linguistic privilege at this point. But to me, this instance mostly signifies the huge socio-emotional work again of linguistic norms breaking and ideology disrupting. When I watched this video today, I'm both deeply empathetic with Tallenne and Mark, but I also agree with Tallenne and Petteri, but I also deeply agree with Mark and my past self, realizing that we asked for so little, but still for too much, which is both true at the same time. But my point today is this: we are all sometimes the Marks and the Hannas and the Petteris and the Tallennes. Sometimes we are the ones who ask for so little, or what we think is little, and sometimes we are the ones who want to warn against change and against the risk of breaking a norm. And these roles will always be changing. But in academic contexts, I don't think we can create multilingually equitable work if we don't engage in this work also emotionally. And attention to this emotional labor is what I miss a little bit in the debates about academic work, debates about being multilingual in academia at the moment. I don't think we can build equitable multilingual workplaces unless we engage in this work with our whole selves, our histories, our ideologies, our socializations, and our emotions. And in that way, I'm actually mostly filled with gratitude when I look at this, for having colleagues who are willing to do this and expose themselves to this work. So where did we end up with the possessives? Well, the funny thing is, last week I asked Tallenne and Mark, so what did we actually decide? And Tallenne said we mostly left them in, and Mark said we mostly took them out. No, the other way around. So we played around them, yeah, but Mark said that we mostly left them. So different perceptions, but this is not even the point. The article is submitted, and it was submitted, and it went through peer review. But then something else happened, that because of the accelerated speed of the peer review, things had to go faster. We were not working on our own schedule anymore, but on the publisher's schedule. Mark and I felt at times that we still lost control over it a little bit. Things had to be turned around really quickly, and so speed kills, even also in this case. And so, also because of the many compromises we had made, Tallenne and Petteri said at some point they actually don't feel that it is their language anymore. Mark and I, who had in the beginning felt like we were actually the first language speakers here, right? Also felt like we had lost control. So we ended up with this piece that we are really happy with, proud of, but also a piece that is written in nobody's language. And then something else happened. Somehow this got out and we got some attention, which is really great. We're very grateful for the positive attention we received for this piece, or for our collaboration. We had a whole page on the university website and in the staff news. But when I look back, I would do things a bit differently when I was interviewed for the piece, because we had just gone through this really intense process of negotiating language norms between first language and second language learners. But look who is featured in this article. It kind of gives the impression that the work is done by the second language learners. And for our process, the main point was that we do it together, right? And so that was the little regret that I made. We have Dinah and Bette were crucial in this socio-emotional work that we did. And yet in the article, it was mostly Mark and I who were positioned as the people who do the work. And also in the article, understandably, they asked us to have a few quick tips about how to integrate multilingual learners in the university life. And you know, I mean, which quick tips would capture this? I don't know. Step out of your language socialization. So it was, and we did give tips. I think there are also quick tips you can give, but it was, I would do things maybe differently nowadays. Okay. Looking at you, are you ready for something new? This was the one story. Okay. Yes, I have another one. Again, I want to give credit to my fabulous colleagues who are partially here. Mintu Väntinen is here, and Lotta Kokkonen, and Melodine Sommier, and Adrienne Caroli is also here. So we wanted to look at language practices in staff meetings. And by the way, if you happen to be a participant of this study that we carried out, please don't disclose the department. So we went to a department and we were curious what language practices occur in these staff meetings, or actually what people's experience is about these practices. And the reason why we wanted to do staff meetings was because these are often the only times when a department comes together, except maybe for Pikku Joulu. But it's very different. So this was an interesting space for us. So we collected some data through a survey in spring 2024. We had 5 open and closed-ended questions, and we had 41 responses, but 35 wanted to be represented in the research. So I'm talking only about those here today. And I will say that I'm not going to go a lot into numbers here. I'm just really going to take a few answers and discuss what I see there. But as a background, to get a big picture, I think you should maybe know that, like, overall, almost everybody, very, very few exceptions, really committed to multilingual practices. So there was barely anybody who said, let's be only Finnish or only Swedish or only English. There was a very clear commitment to multilinguality. And secondly, maybe it's important to say that most people felt that everything is fine. Everything's going okay. So there's no big problem here. So this, which is good, you know, in general. Yes, or I'll talk about that. So I want to lead with this because it resonated with me. So we had this one participant who said that they talked a little bit about the language learning trajectory. This was a Finnish learner as well, and they said that yeah, things have gotten better. They have acquired more Finnish, but it's still difficult to follow depending on a staff meeting, depending on the topic. And then they say it takes so much energy out of you that it also means I'm completely fried afterwards and I can't get anything else done. And maybe I empathize because I feel that myself. But then I wanted to understand this exhaustion more, and I started to look in the literature, like what is this exhaustion? And you know, there was this whole emotional affective turn in SLA starting in the 2000s, and we still don't know a lot about this exhaustion. There are some researchers that have mapped burnout scales onto language learners and found some significant data and were able to say, yeah, that there's actually language learner burnout is a real thing, so that's not an imagined thing. But like this, that's still a bit different. So we don't know a whole lot, but what we know is it is real. So this is not one person, and there's a real phenomenon about language learner exhaustion, and it's a real health risk. But that's a bit besides the point, because what I really actually think about is that that it illustrates a point that I had been kind of really curious about or having in my head, and what I call maybe now kielityö. I really like, you can also translate it into your own language. I mean, language work maybe works too, or språkarbete maybe. But I like the Finnish word for some reason, I don't know. I think it's kind of nice because there's some parallel words. There's maybe hoivotyö, or tunnetyö, or metatyö, and all this kind of work that is often unpaid, unacknowledged, not always, but often invisibilized. But yet, and that's an important point, it's crucial for the functioning of a community or a society. And so that's why I want to call it, I want to think with you today about language work, or kielityö. So what I have myself defined this a little bit as, you can see, dear co-authors, if you agree with me, that it's the work that we do as users of non-dominant language to participate in language-dominant activities and environments. So it can involve a lot of small things like intense listening, or looking things up, or translating something, using apps, or interrupting to ask for clarification or repetition. But also, I would say that dominant language users do this work also. They also translate, they also provide materials, they also engage in processes of negotiating their own ideologies. So the difficult work that was done by Tallenne and Petteri, for example, in the first example, I would call that language work also. So it can have many different phases. So this is really new. You can criticize this, so I'm kind of testing this only. But what all these types of language work have in common is that they are all these things, usually. But there was actually one thing in our data where this language work was not invisibilized, but it was very visible. And that's what the participants called a translation corner. And the way it was described was that it was in the staff meetings, there was somebody, sometimes, not regularly, but sometimes, who was sitting there and translating impromptu, without any equipment, but for the people that were sitting around them, from Finnish to English. And this is when this work became visible. And here's a few things people said about this translation corner. And we translated, or for this presentation, I'm only using, like, some of the answers were in Finnish and English, but I'm using only the English versions now, so also to protect the participants. So, so some people said, I understand the necessity of the translation corner, which is why I decided to try find a place to sit further away in the future. Or if the presentation is in Finnish, or even partly in Finnish, then I rely on the colleagues translating for me. That is not their job, it distracts them, and it's an awkward imposition. Or it brings a lot of visibility on oneself to switch the language. It's annoying to have to be the one who asks, can you speak more slowly, and can you articulate, and can you remember to use selkusvuomi if possible? So this is more about visibility and about kielityö in general. But I think what is really interesting about this data to me is that this is not coming from either the Finnish learners or the already more proficient Finnish users, but it's across the participants, right? So across participants, this visibilized work of doing translation was considered not very positively as an interruption, a distraction, an imposition, and generally awkward. So when the language works becomes visible, it's not usually positive visibility, is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes kielityö was also assigned work, or what I call it, maybe there's a better term, for now I'm calling it that. So some participants, for example, said, well, I would like to see departmental and staff meetings as an opportunity to learn Finnish. We are doing a huge disservice to our colleagues who have moved to Finland if we reinforce the English-speaking bubble of the university, which does not at all correspond to the reality of the surrounding society. I speak Finnish and I'm able to participate in Finnish. This is also the language of choice I prefer for interaction at work because it helps me practice the language and improve my professional Finnish skills. For me, being able to use the language sufficiently in different life situations is my personal goal and part of feeling at home in Finland. So again, I want to point out that we have answers that are going kind of in the same direction from Finnish first and second language users. And also here, there's lots of research. I love when people cite research in a survey. It feels like it's something I would do. There's a lot of research about how the use of English in Finnish workplaces actually makes it more difficult for people who do not speak Finnish to learn Finnish and integrate in the Finnish society. So I want to say what is happening here, I'm 100% sure is well intended, and on some level probably some act of caring and protecting, probably. But here is why is my problem with this kind of discourse. So there is, these examples illustrate that learning Finnish and integration to the Finnish society by extension is kind of a permanent task that never ends of international Finnish learning staff. It's a little bit the opposite of what happened with Taina and Petteri, who themselves did the work, because this is people who tell international staff, and also if they are themselves that, this is your job. The work has been assigned, and it's not negotiable. Whether or not people would like to learn Finnish, or come to the meetings in order to practice Finnish, or whether or not they would like to integrate into the Finnish society, or the problematic assumption that Finnish society is one whole, of which Finnish international staff is outside, and the Finnish is the entrance ticket into it, which is not usually how this works. This all remains unquestioned. And all this happens under the veil of integration and support. And this discursive layer of we're just trying to support you, so we speak Finnish in the staff meetings is a bit insidious, because it makes resistance to this perspective almost impossible or quite risky. So not doing this Finnish work, or not or rejecting this assignment of being assigned this work could be easily construed as being lazy or defiant or ungrateful or not integratable, which, I mean, in this nowadays today's academic or societal climate, who wants to take that risk? So I do understand the positive intention, and I do also agree that as Finnish learners, now I'm taking myself into this, we need to have exposure. But I think we also need to have some agency over how that happens and when that happens, and we don't need anybody to assign us that work. In our questionnaire, we also asked about potential solutions or ways forward. And I actually was quite moved by one of the answers. No, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. This was actually when we asked about solutions, people were also referring to multilingual practices like translanguaging or translation work. But the problem with those was that they were mostly seen as not quite, I'm standing in front of this, they're not quite effective. So some people said, for example, the university's administrative language is Finnish, so even translating the university's administrative terminology into English causes terminological inaccuracy and difficulties in understanding. And other people said, well, full bilingualism, or so-called translanguaging, is very burdensome, and it considerably slows down the handling of matters. And I think that there's probably some truth in all that. Like multilingualism, if you take it seriously, it's not usually like it takes more time. It's slower. It takes effort. So it's not usually something that you can just rush by. Maybe that's also why it causes this friction with the academic system that has been built as a meritocracy. You know, because things have to be fast and you have to be hyper productive. So maybe that's also the tension we're seeing here. But what happens with when we discredit multilingual practices like translations or translanguaging is that kind of the work that the Finnish learners do becomes the only viable option, right? All other language work has been discredited. And with the discreditation of translanguaging and translation, the only inevitable work, as I call it, the only inevitable kielityö is for Finnish learners to pick it up themselves. So So that's a bit the issue with these kind of discourses. And then we can also talk about this reference to language of university being Finnish, which is partially accurate. But then what I wanted to share, there were actually some really, really interesting statements also about somebody who even used the word language work. So here in the fourth row. So this person said, one idea could be to jointly compile the main themes of the discussion in English, for example, in a shared file. Perhaps the language work wouldn't be so extensive if it was done by several people in short shifts. So there was this idea already in our data that kielityö could be jaettu työ, could be shared work. So what is shared work? Let's now also remember the first part of this talk, where we explored the emotional labor of breaking away from harmful linguistic norms. I think it illustrates so perfectly that first language users who have the most linguistic privilege have a crucial role to play in language work. And language work can be a variety of things. As I said, it can be translation or listening or asking for clarification or engaging in reflection. But I think it's an invitation to all of you to think about how can this be shared? How can this be shared in your department, in your research groups, in your meetings, in your lives? And what kind of university do we need to create around this so that this jaettu työ is indeed jaettu, so shared? I want to be very clear, the kielityö that many multilingual workers, especially second language learners, do at the university is really crucial for the working of the multilingual workplace to function. And although it's often taken for granted, the fact that it's often taken for granted, I don't think that's a problem of character. You know, it's not like people are evil and they just. But I also don't even think it's a matter of awareness. I think people are more or less aware of that this needs to happen on some level. I think it's a structural problem. I really do think that the invisibilization and devaluing of kielityö is structural, and the universities actually have the power to make this visible, to put value to it, to make time and space for it, to attach resources to it. And for this, I would think that we need a policy change. We need representation of Finnish learners in leadership, for example. And we need media and communication in more languages, not just in Finnish and English. And we need that consistently, and we need it without having to beg for it. We need resources to publish in different languages. I think that point was made already yesterday. I think really important. Also, of course, in English and in Finnish, but also in all our other languages. And we need resources for building and maintaining multilingual collaborations. And universities have the possibilities to do all of these things. I want to also say that actually the work that Daina, Mark, Petri and I did is continuing. So we are actually putting together multilingual writing groups. So far we have groups in French, Hungarian, Finnish, and maybe German, and we are still looking for somebody to write in Swedish. We're all going to write in these languages, and in each group there will be a first language users, second language users, heritage language users, additional foreign language. And we will document this. So if you're interested, join us. It's going to be an interesting project, I think. So, but we also, I think I want to point out things that are not going great and where we could do better, but I also think that finger pointing doesn't bring anything. I just want to also point out that there are structural or societal issues why things are the way they are, and what I'm suggesting here does go very much against a climate of meritocracy and hyperproductivity. So many of us are exhausted, and many of us compete for the same resources and for the same positions, and it makes it very easy to fall into this us versus them kind of trap. You know, it's like Finnish learners against Finnish speakers or something like this, or international versus local. But in this climate, I think we have to pull ourselves out of this trap and think about how can we turn, like this idea that Daina said as a joke, if I have to suffer, everybody else has to. How can we turn this into because I had to suffer, I'm going to make sure nobody else has to. So as a last point, I think I want to also acknowledge that we don't all share kielityö in the same way, because we have many other loads that we carry, right? So for example, Melodine Sommier has talked about the racial load of women of color who work in urban centers, and so we could also talk about a neurodivergency load, or a gender load, or a disability load, and many others. And I think one of the next steps I want to do is try to see how these loads interact with each other and intersect. And so we need to also be careful not to contextualize kielityö in this sense. But for now, for today, I want to advocate for a counter space to the climate of hyperproductivity and meritocracy, towards universities that are spaces for shared, sustained, slow, deep reflection, experimenting, learning, the spaces that are necessary for reconsideration and redistribution of kielityö and unrecognized labor. What I mean by this is that we need also a culture change. This is not impossible. I think it's actually probably already underway. We all have the ability to create these spaces, and I think the one that I shared earlier is one, where other values count: care and sharing and belonging and depth and slowness. And if you have these spaces already, cherish them, nourish them, and please expand them. Because I think if this time is teaching us anything, I think that we can't take this for granted at all. And we have to protect what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions here or comments?
Dinah didn't run out of the room, which was my goal. So.
Are there any? Oh, okay.
I was trying to give the possibility for the others first, but thank you, Hanna. That was really, like you said, this is something that we've been talking about for the past, how many years now?
6 years.
2 years, yeah, 3 years
Oh,
with this article. Completely agree with everything you said. I would have my own additions, but then that's another issue. I really like the idea of emotional labor here, because that's what it is. We are pulling ourselves by the hair from all kinds of things that we are socialized into, things that we don't like, but we still do them. Things that we don't realize we don't like until somebody points them to us is another thing. And I think one of the things that's really important here that you also somehow mentioned or brought up is that it has to be a sort of a safe space. And by safe space, I don't mean the kind of misunderstanding that is often given to safe spaces, that it's something where nobody has to suffer or where nobody has to face unpleasant ideas. It's actually a safe space is one where you can face unpleasant ideas and you can face uneasy thoughts with a safe crowd. And I think that's why this whole, I just want to thank you for this presentation, because I think it's really important to bring that up and to put that into words and talk about that. And I have to just say that one of the things that was difficult for me, in addition to the possessivisufiksi, I don't want to go there, that's too much, but was to speak Finnish and not speak my too fast Western dialect.
I noticed. Yeah.
Because I had to also learn to speak Finnish differently.
Yeah.
I couldn't use my own language either.
And that's the cool thing. Suddenly you become a language learner like us, you know? That was the
that
magic
wasn't
of
cool,
the
but
whole.
let's not go there.
We can all be uncomfortable together.
Yeah, no, but absolutely, that's true.
We all, that's what I meant. It was language learning for all of us.
Yeah, just thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I will say that, like, I did choose not to show the video, but in this discussion about possessives, one of my favorite things is how you can see, like, physically Dinah's discomfort, how she's like shifting in the chair and like scratching her hair. And like really, so it was really work. It like really worked her. Yeah. So thank you for engaging.
So I have another question for you. I was very interested in what you said at the end, with the policy change and the culture change and the strive against hyperproductivity and meritocracy. So what are the structural possibilities and the hindrances towards this change? I think what will the head of department, what will the dean, what will the director say if you say we will forget about a certain amount of publications per year, we will try to think slowly and produce more quality rather than quantity, and then the rector, dean, the head of department might say there is no contradiction, you should be both hyperproductive and high quality. So what are the possibilities to do this policy change and culture change?
Yeah, that's the question, right? So I think a lot is possible already now that we can do every day. Like I think we can, like I said, like we are starting to write in multiple languages. Join us, I think not. Like I do understand that we are also in different levels of precarity here, but like many of us have the possibility to write more slowly and then in different languages or engage in this work. And for those who don't, I think we have a responsibility as staff members who are in relatively secure positions to take them along and make sure that they can participate in ways that work for them and benefit. But I'm not naive about this. I do think that this will not be easy because it's going against a whole culture and policy right now. It's not going to be like every step of the way is going to feel difficult, right? But I think there's also a lot to be gained. So of course the easiest thing would always to go along with what we have. But but I don't think we should be satisfied with that. But you know, I mean, what will the dean say? Can I say I don't care? Like, I think the way I experience our leadership is not as hardcore people who would oppose this. The way I experience them is that as people who would welcome this, but maybe who wouldn't necessarily think that this needs some additional structure, support or so. And that is something that we can also argue for. I think we can argue for funding to fund multilingual writing groups, for example. But if nobody does, they won't exist. So very concretely, in my department, I would like to have a task force for multilingualism, for example, that watches over our own practices a little bit and makes things like that happen. And it's not just hey, the slides are in English, so we're fine, right? So if this is the kind of multilingualism that we practice, then I think that's very sad. But so that's the first step. But I think there's steps for everybody. Like you can choose a very small one, even if it's just, you know, interrupting something and saying, could we add another language here or two? That's already, like, interrupting the norm is often the hardest thing, and then take it from there. But yeah, it's definitely not a quick or easy change.
Thank you. Actually, I just want to comment related to that comment, and then because Taina also mentioned, and Hanna, you also mentioned that work is often invisible, and I think this is the same when we think about what we have to gain, because I think what we have to gain is or will remain invisible quite often. And if we think about education, this is the same. We often talk about learning outcomes or outcomes of our outcomes as researchers, output. But I think what is much more important is what we gain. So I would even prefer the term, I don't know, educational gains, something that is quite often invisible. So in a way, I agree that we don't care. There is still a lot to gain, even if it's not visible. Yeah. And the same for the work that we do is invisible. So this kind of invisibility is maybe it will change in the future, but it's important that we feel ourselves that it's there.
Yeah. Thanks, Adrian.
Kiitos, Hanna. Tack. It was really nice of you to share with us these two really like nice experiences where you have been emotionally involved yourself as well. I wonder if we are too much looking for one solution for these issues, like a practice for staff meetings, a way of writing articles, a way of being academics in multilingual environments. It's like in the one of the presentations yesterday, or the keynotes, one size doesn't fit all. How about, do you think the key is to accept variation, different practices, rather than trying to find one?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that, I think it would go the completely wrong way if we try to open up a space and then open it up only in one direction, right? So that would, like, I think we need to find the creativeness in us again and think about, okay, how do we do this in our way? And I think it's also not a good idea to think about we need to do everything differently. I think we can do a lot of the things that we are already doing, but let's just add a little something here and a little something there, and then think about things differently. And that's actually, I think the rethinking of things is maybe the biggest step. That is like, that we take so many things for granted because they are so normalized. And we have to publish, and we have to publish in Finnish, and we have to publish in English, and we have to do it this way, and Finnish has to sound like this, and English has to sound like this, and Swedish has to sound like this, and we don't, like, I think the not stopping and not thinking and not considering is kind of the thing that we have to disrupt. And that can be done in many different ways. But when I say that we can make small adjustments to the way they think, I don't actually think these are small things. So I don't want to be here saying that we just need to turn the screw a little bit and things will be fine. I do actually think this is kind of a revolution, but like, it's an opening of spaces that can go as far as we take it. But the point is that somebody needs to take it somewhere. And I do agree that there is not one way to do this. And I think the way that we found is likely very different from what somebody else finds. But it's just about doing something different.
There's a comment, just a great job, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Oh, great, thank you.
I like when I get That's right. There's a volume button here. This volume.
Nyt on parempi.
Niin, tervetuloa vielä tähän viimeiseen paneelikeskusteluun. Welcome. Ja minulla on ilo nyt tässä esitellä meidän panelistit. Siellä ensimmäisenä vasemmalla Åsa Palviainen, professor i svenska språket vid Jyväskylän universitet. Taina Saarinen, joka on johtajana ja tutkimusprofessorina Jyväskylän yliopiston koulutuksen tutkimuslaitoksessa. Ja sitten Johanna Inser-Kananen, Associate Professor of English at University of Jyväskylä. Thank you for your inspiring speak. Och Henrik Ram, Professor i svenska vid Karlstad universitet. Varsågod, olkaa hyvä. Floor is yours.
Look at me. Thank you, Johanna. I'm still kind of processing what you said. Perhaps what was left in my mind was the last thing you said, those little things are the biggest things, and rethinking things. I am not done with the rethinking, so I have to process a little bit. But yesterday someone asked me about my Finnish, because I'm also a Finnish learner, and I live in a very Finnish-speaking environment, and that is different from other. If we think about Swedish-speaking Finns who have attended Swedish medium schools, they learned Finnish at school and perhaps lived in a bilingual environment or a Swedish-speaking area. For them it's different. Their situation is different from mine, because I came from Sweden, I didn't know any Finnish. I learned my Finnish here, so this is my home, so this is where I am. But the question I got was, how is your Finnish? And I actually said that it's good, I'm okay with Finnish, but I don't write academic pieces in Finnish, and I don't teach in Finnish. So that was my way of explaining where my Finnish is. And now when you told me that it's possible to write in some kind of simplified Finnish, perhaps that would be for me to go outside the box and also to try to teach in Finnish. And I think one thing why I don't want to teach in Finnish is about feeling embarrassed. I'm a professor, and if I try to speak in Finnish, and I do a lot of possessive errors and that kind of things, speak slower, my vocabulary becomes smaller, I'm not that outspoken and expressive as I am in Swedish, it's embarrassing for me. So that's why I say, no, I don't do it.
Can I respond?
Yeah, sure.
So first of all, I think it's great that you are sharing this here on a public stage, that you sometimes feel embarrassed about Finnish. I think we need to say these things out loud, and especially when we are in a position of respect or power, like professors. I started teaching Finnish a little while ago, not like a whole class, but course, a class here, a class there, and I had great partners like Päivi Ikanen or Christina Skinnari when she was before she retired, and one of them, Christina and Päivi, both actually said after one class they had gotten feedback that the best thing about this was that the professor was speaking broken Finnish, and within that those were future language teachers, right? They were Kimo students who also understood a lot about this language awareness, I guess. But what happened was that in this one class where they realized, okay, you can actually be in this position and be a second language learner and make mistakes and say all these things maybe in a not so elegant, sort of clumsy way. They learned so much about language identity and the language and content and what language, like, I think you can read 1,000 articles about this, but when you see it in practice, it has a different meaning. And I didn't even think of that going in, but to think that like, oh, for them some things became really real now, seeing a Finnish learner teaching, you know, that was really powerful. And like, just imagine what it would be to have like a dean who is a Finnish learner, for example. I mean, I think it would be a really cool experience to see that.
Can I continue from that? Because I think this discussion is also really interesting from the point of view of like how fast or how quickly have these relatively new end of 19th century standardized understandings of what is a language, how quickly have they penetrated our bodies? And I think what's comforting about that's a relatively new thing, less than 200 years. And I think the comforting idea is that we can also learn away from those relatively fast, hopefully. And for me that was, because like I said earlier, for me speaking Finnish is also hard. I speak a very distinct dialect. And I've been asked here in Jyväskylä, I've been working here for 20 years, I still live in Western Finland. And I've been asked, onko hieno kun sä oot säilyttänyt murteis noin hyvin? It's so great that you have been able to preserve your dialect so well. And I'm like, where would it go? Why would I lose it? Like, what's the assumption? And I think it's interesting that we still kind of think about language, and it also relates to this professionality ideal, that we deal with language as if it were just an instrument of conveying thoughts, when in fact the thing that Hanna described was very much a process of creating knowledge, of understanding, like the slowness thing. It actually forced Petter and me to think about what we actually thought that we knew. And we didn't. And we had to go through that. And we would need to embrace that slowness in academia much more.
I had a problem before entering the scene here if I should speak in English or in Swedish, but I think I will start in English and then I will promote Swedish because I think it's important with linguistic diversity. I think there are so many solutions. Of course, there's not one quick change, one general solution, but one solution is, of course, that you try to promote linguistic diversity in the lunchroom, in the coffee room. So when there are new colleagues of mine coming to Karlstad or to Lund, where I worked before, I checked with them, do you understand Swedish? And some of them might say, yes, I understand Sam. And then I spoke Swedish slowly with them, and I said, it's fine, you can answer in English, so that you don't automatically switch into English. I have a colleague of mine in at Lund University, and she says it's an absurd situation at her department. There is one, maybe two persons that feel a bit insecure in listening to Swedish, but actually they have lived in Sweden for a long, long time, and the consequence is that all staff meetings and also all the informal chat in the coffee room is in English. And I think that's losing the linguistic diversity. And it comes from the leadership, but of course it's this necessity of a cultural change that you must break the ice and start mixing Swedish and English. And you don't have to, let's say, if I'm a learner in a language, if I don't know the language properly, I could mix it in a way. I mean, if you're away, if I speak about Swedish, if you're on the way learning Swedish, you could have Swenglish. That's not a problem. You mix it together. And then you promote the use of Swedish. Then I asked you about this, the hindrances, the possibilities. I mean, I think in practical economical terms and the governance of universities. If you go to certain universities in Sweden, they are very strict on the hyperproductivity. If you don't produce a certain amount of articles, if you don't do this and this, then you will lose research time, you will be punished. So slowness is not a possibility, but luckily I was privileged at Lund University, I'm privileged now at Karlstad University. We don't have that punishment, but I think the problem is the culture. If you see that your colleagues are very productive and you're not that productive because you produce in various languages and in different settings, then you might feel that you're not doing as good work as they do. So you have to go to yourself as well, as you said.
Yeah, that's difficult, especially if you have these policies. I think connecting what you two said, I would even say, like, because you talked about your accent and where should it go, and well, we know where it's expected to go, right? Out the window, because you're supposed to speak pretty Finnish. And I think that's what happens with, like, I mean, there's like with less prestigious accents, like Eastern Finnish accents, they actually do go away, and people don't use them in academic circles. And so thinking about also, you said Swinglish should be also allowed, and I agree, and the accent should be allowed. I'm still dreaming of the future when I have a colleague in the English group that speaks Rallienglanti. So, like, I think we need to think about, like, bringing it all in and allowing it all. I think that would be really wonderful. I had a colleague in the US who spoke in the variety of Southern American states. So it's quite different, and it was lovely to hear her present. We need this richness, rikdom, eikö niin?
Jag har ju märkt, precis som nu, att när jag är här i Jyväskylä, när jag är på universitetet, när jag träffar folk omkring mig, så talar jag lärarsvenska. Jag talar långsamt, för jag vill att Taina ska förstå, jag vill att studenterna ska förstå. Jag talar långsammare. Och sen när jag åker hem till Göteborg här och träffar mina vänner och släkten och familjen där, så pratar jag ju så här. Så jag har, min svenska i Jyväskylä är väldigt annorlunda från när jag åker hem. Helt klart. Men det jag skulle säga också är att när jag växte upp och pluggade i Sverige, jag bodde i Sverige mina 31 år, så var den här mindset var svenska. Jag kommer ihåg att jag tyckte att kurserna i andra språksinlärning och tvåspråkighet var jättetråkiga. Det var första språkstillägnande var intressant, svenska språket var intressant. And then I moved to Finland. And suddenly I was a minority. And that changed a lot of the mindset. And I think that's often a problem. I think you mentioned that people are not evil. Here in Finland, Finnish speakers or in Jyväskylä, they're not evil. They're just not aware because they haven't been in the position where they don't understand anything. So that was a really eye-opener for me to come to Finland. And my research also switched dramatically. I started with completely new topics, and what I'm doing now is Swedish as a second language, multilingualism, language policy. And I would never have done that if I didn't move to Finland. So it's also about us bringing our bodies into new environments. That's how that helps your way of switching, rethinking, because you're in a new position. I don't know, jag vet inte hur du känner, Henrik. Du är svenskspråkig, bor i Sverige, svenskspråkiga universitet.
Jag skulle säga det att jag är väldigt intresserad av språk. I min första utbildning till ämneslärare så läste jag tyska och svenska som andra språk. Så jag tycker att språklig mångfald är väldigt viktigt. Så och när jag reser på konferenser så är det ibland konferenser på svenska och ibland på engelska. Så det är olika i olika sammanhang. Men jag tänkte om jag nu skulle försöka vara konkret och språkpolitisk, jag försöker prata långsamt. Och så tänker jag att jag kanske slår in lite öppna dörrar, men jag skulle önska att om man jobbar i svensk språkvetenskap som jag gör, då menar jag att jag måste självklart publicera mig på svenska. Men jag kan inte säga att jag bara ska publicera mig på svenska, det räcker inte, för att även om svenska är förståeligt för kanske 20-30 miljoner människor, vi säger det, så räcker inte det. Jag måste publicera mig på engelska också. Och det gör jag. Så jag menar att i de ämnena, svenska, så börjar man kanske med svenska och sen på engelska. Eller tvärtom. Och det här är ju gemensamt för andra språk. Om jag är litteraturvetare i tysk litteraturvetenskap, då bör jag förstås publicera mig både på tyska och på engelska. Och det här gäller ju i flera ämnen inom humaniora. Om man tittar på socialt arbete, historia, sociologi, så publicerar sig de forskarna ganska mycket även på svenska. Så att inom humaniora samhällsvetenskap så tycker jag det fungerar ganska bra i alla fall. Men om man beger sig utanför det, om man tar till exempel en forskare i medicin, det är fullkomligt uteslutet för forskaren i medicin att skriva annat än på engelska, för allt samarbete sker på engelska. Det är en ännu mera internationell forskargrupp där engelskan är det som kittar samman, det som är rent konkret på universitetet där man jobbar. Men egentligen så skulle prefekten för den medicinska institutionen, dekanen för medicinsk fakultet och i slutändan rektor kunna säga att den styrning som vi anser nödvändig är att ni som medicinska forskare även skriver på svenska. Det kan vara populärvetenskap, det kan vara en rapport som riktas till läkare, till sjuksköterskor. Och det här kräver ju liksom ett kulturellt skifte, den här kulturella förändringen. Och det kräver också att man är modig och ser att det här kommer ju att minska produktiviteten en aning. Eller kanske ganska mycket till att börja med. Men jag tror att det skulle vara nödvändigt. För som det är nu så tycker jag att forskare i humaniora tar ansvar för svenska som vetenskapligt språk. Men det gör man inte inom medicin. Och det är inte forskarens fel. Det är strukturernas fel.
First of all, can I ask Sandra, were you able to follow this discussion? Or?
Like 40% of it.
Okay, because I'm also wondering, like, and this is fine. This sounds horrible now, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do we have to understand everything that goes on all the time?
We don't.
Yeah. So I think that's like, I think you could probably pick on something and then continue from there in this discussion, even if you couldn't follow everything.
Or I could ask.
Or you could ask, yeah.
Ich glaube, ich habe fast alles, also nicht fast alles, aber die Hälfte ungefähr verstanden. Aber
Nochmal.
ich glaube, ich habe ungefähr so weniger als die Hälfte verstanden. Aber
Okay,
es ging um Publizieren in Schwedisch und Englisch,
ja.
Ja? Und die Hindernisse.
Ja.
Ja.
Und die Unterschiede zwischen
und die Unterschiede zwischen
Fächer.
Ja, genau. Zum Beispiel so in Soziologie und Geschichte, glaube ich, hast du gesagt.
Ja.
Ist es.
Und das Medizin, die Forschung innerhalb von Medizin, die publizieren gar nicht in Schwedisch, nur in Englisch. Und das ist ein Problem. Aber die Erklärung, das ist einfach Geld und Beschlüsse von Uni-Level.
Ja. Genau.
I'm going to venture into saying something like, das war ein sehr interessantes Experiment auch. Because I think we've also witnessed here that we don't need to understand every word. We, like Hanna, you said that you understand 40%, and that's actually pretty much because usually in this kind of situation, the setup is already given. We know that we are talking about multilingualism, we know we are talking about higher education, and then if you understand 40%, or I think more actually now that I listen to your summary, we can still have a discussion. Absolutely. And I think that's super interesting. And just a quick promotion of an article that Adrienne and Hanna and I wrote about, about language use in higher education, where it's sometimes thought that English would be the language of like science, like internationalization, and the local language would be the language for popularization, and we also wanted to challenge that thinking a bit, that it would also be important to write for popular audiences in English and for local audiences in, and for science audiences in local languages, to break these patterns also a bit. And now I'll shut up. Thank you. This was an interesting. Thank you.
I want to piggyback off of that real quick, and I want to say one thing that also came out of this article, what I think was really important. Just because you see it in English as a finished product doesn't mean that the process was in English, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to think about also the multilingualism that we maybe don't see at first glance, because that was, for example, in our piece quite important. And then the other thing, I wanted to say that if you feel like you can't immediately put on your activist gear and fight against the structures, I think there is so many spaces where we follow these norms that are instilled in us, and it's not even necessary. And that's the thing that bugs me. Let's change the things that are really easy to change. like in our classrooms, in our teaching, like I'm not saying, hey, stop publishing in English right away and do something completely different, no matter what promotions and contracts be damned, you know. Like I think we have so much space that where we follow these norms without even like that would have like zero consequences, except it would be promoting multilingualism, right? So I give you one example where I think that we are a bit. I'm from Austria, so what we would say, we are more Catholic than the Pope. Like we are following rules just because we follow the rules, not because of any. So I was in grad school at the University of Minnesota, and there was lots of international students who were my colleagues, my peers. We were one cohort. So we wanted to give a presentation. We were in the first year, you know, young and, you know, rebellious. And we got together with a friend from Catalonia, Brazil, Japan, and me. So there was the four of us. And we wanted to present in our first languages because we had all just moved to the US a year before, and we were really thinking that when we are going home, we can't talk about our research with our families, and that's really depressing. We need to reclaim our languages. So we submitted to a big national conference, AAA. We got accepted with our multilingual abstracts, and we presented in our languages. And then we came to our department, and they had a grad student, kind of like what we have here, spring school. So we wanted to do the same presentation there, and they rejected us because they couldn't read our abstracts. And it was so unnecessary because those abstracts had been reviewed by a national conference, right? It was completely ridiculous. But those were our advisors who rejected us. They could have just said, I trust you. You know, it's probably going to be fine. Just do it. You need to do this. No. We had to actually submit also a translation in English in order to be able to present. So it's like, sometimes I think we do these things in a completely unnecessary, just because we think we have to. And these are the first spaces, I think, where we could, very low risk, change things.
I've been to a lot of conferences for a decade or so where translanguaging is the thing everyone is doing. All research, a lot of research about translanguaging and celebration of translanguaging, and but all these conferences have been in English only. I don't think I've listened to any. I think perhaps one, but otherwise I haven't listened to any presentation about translanguaging in other languages than English only. So we're talking about translanguaging in English. When we were preparing this symposium, I know we were struggling with this. How are we going to do? We wanted to include at least Finnish, Swedish, and English. How do we do this? And not in the traditional way that we have one presentation in Swedish, one in Finnish, and one in English, and then we are multilingual. And then we have interpretation. Yesterday we had wonderful, is it simultaneous interpretation, and they were really, really skilled. But still there, it's about one language. So some of us speak one language on the stage, and they are interpreting into another language. So still we are dealing with this monolingual things. And I still haven't. En ole puhunut mitään suomea, mutta nyt mä puhun vähän suomea. So it's so difficult to get rid of those structures, ideologies, your own historical body, because it's so stuck. So it's so difficult to break these barriers and be, I don't know, truly multilingual or whatever. It's hard work, it's kielityö. And I'm not sure yet if we have managed in this seminar to do what our intention really was.
Det är jättesvårt att vara liksom på riktigt tvåspråkig i en situation. Alltså att jag skulle byta språk mitt i like go to English from now and then tillbaka till svenska. När du går till Österbotten så är det, man hör ju att du pratar finska och de pratar svenska och de pratar den där konstiga dialekten som ingen förstår, men de alla gör det, förlåt, men de alla gör det i samma situation. Men mest pratar vi ju en eller annan. We are like, we are monolingual multilinguals. We speak one language at a time and are really uncomfortable about mixing languages. But I'm just thinking... No, I just wanted to say that maybe we should do away with a lot of regulation about languages. And I know the regulation is also needed to protect languages, particularly minority languages. But also, I come with a basketball background of coaching and administrating basketball. And I know that it's super easy to, like, you have a rule that doesn't quite work, so let's make more rules around it. And it's so easy to expand on the rules and get more rules to explain the previous rules, and just that doesn't work. Okay, Entschuldigung.
It's okay. Ja, ich habe dich wieder unterbrochen. Ich habe gerade gedacht, was sind meine Plätze, wo ich translanguaging kann? Because you said it's so hard to do it, and I thought yes, it's true. But then I thought, no, wait. But I have spaces where translanguaging comes out really naturally, and it's not an effort at all. And that's my family, for example. Yes. So that's, maybe we can, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm not doing a great job with the microphone today, but that's the kind of safety level maybe we need to translanguage more. Und ich habe es jetzt auch in Unterrichten probiert. Das ist schon noch cool. So I did try with my students. Päivi is not here today, but she is teaching. But she and I, we did this experiment where we asked our students just for one class to not use the most dominant language, and that was really cool, because then suddenly translanguaging was like the most normal and the most important tool, because otherwise it didn't work, and everything was suddenly allowed, and lots of rules went out the window suddenly, and so that was a cool experience. And then if you have the community around it, the group around it, then it also is easier. I think alone it's impossible.
I've been thinking about the multilingualism of department. I'm not a dean, but I'm in a similar position in the university hierarchy, and you really easily get into this catch-22 of okay, you need to translate everything into 2 languages, but then that could be burdensome. It's not actually, that's a spoiler. But, that can be. Or then if you only use one language, then you exclude other people. But then if you assume that somebody doesn't know Finnish, that's also exclusive, like you're excluding them. So there's like a lot of these mental wheels that you wheel around when you try to figure out what's a working language policy. Do you put all the internet, do you have the translation corner where you put everybody who doesn't speak any Finnish into one corner? And that's another way of providing information, but also at the same time excluding them from other kinds of contexts. And I don't have any, like, I guess I would say that let's just, I had a worse word for this, but let's just mess up as much as we can, because that's like, if we're afraid of these situations, then that doesn't make it any better. Yeah. But seriously, spoiler, bilingual emails is not a problem. Just saying, if anybody tells you they are, it's not.
I think I will promote a book written in Swedish about the language situation in Sweden. It's called På engelska förstår jag ungefär. It's written by Peter Svensson, Ola Håkansson, and it's I would say it's a mixture between a debating book and scientific investigations. They are not linguists. They work at the School of Economics at Lund University, and they are very worried about the increase that English is expanding in all territories at universities, and in business administration it comes to absurd situations that also at the basic courses, more and more even basic courses are taught in English, because the professors, the lecturers, they're recruited from meritocratic reasons, and they come from abroad, and then the leadership says, okay, we will have to have also the education in English. And they mean it's important to fight against this threat towards the use of Swedish at university level, and which could lead to that you have problem to talk about things in Swedish because, well, it's actually an absurd situation if you do an education to become an account manager, and you will probably work in Swedish in a small company or authority, you will work in Swedish, but you don't have the proper terms in Swedish because your education was in English. So that's one absurd example of the expansion of English. I haven't seen that in humanities, of course. I mean, it's not a problem that you have courses at master level, that you have these courses in English, because that's a way to attract students. But I think you should be aware in various disciplines that you shouldn't automatically gain students from abroad, gain more professors from abroad, and then you suddenly you have, without any decisions, you realize that no, there are only a couple of courses left at Finnish, in Finnish or in Swedish. And another totally different thing. When I worked at Lund University, I had responsibility for research and research education for different humanistic disciplines, and every year we had so-called quality dialogue with an external reviewer, a few of the disciplines, and I was there, and also the representative from the faculty, and of course there was a doctoral representative, and we often got the question, do the doctoral representative need to speak Swedish? And my answer was no. The doctoral representative doesn't need to speak Swedish, but I assume that the representative, the PhD student, has lived in Sweden for a couple of years, and is it okay that the dialogue will be in Swedish? And I also always got the answer that, yeah, that's fine. So the PhD representatives, they said what they wanted to say in English, and we said what we wanted to say in English, and in Swedish, and it functioned. And in one of these meetings, at the coffee break with the cinnamon bun and all those things, I asked one of the PhD students, how is your Swedish? And actually her Swedish was really, really good. And I said, why don't you use Swedish? Why don't you switch to Swedish now after the coffee break? But she said, no, I don't want to. So she was trapped in this trap of being perfect in the language. She didn't want to change into Swedish because she wanted to keep speaking English, which was, of course, her English was better because she wrote in English. But I think that was so sad that you were trapped in this English trap, so to say.
That's also about personality. I feel that if I speak Finnish, I'm different from when I'm speaking Swedish. And in a meeting or so, I know if the meeting is in Finnish and I'm able to say something in Finnish or even English, but I mean, those who know me as a private person in Swedish, I'm a Leo. So I want to be here on stage. I enjoy, I'm really extrovert. But when the context is Finnish, I become a different type of person. Yeah. And I'm very uncomfortable about that. So that probably could be one case that she feels that she's different speaking in Swedish. She's not herself.
I mean, you have to, if you're not... if you don't use 2 or 3 languages every day, you become a bit of a different person. I don't mind using a different language, but my core personality, that's in Swedish.
That's interesting because I've never actually... I'm not quite sure if I buy into the thinking that we need one language, or that there would be one language that we would be full in somehow. I think I am full in anything I speak, but in different ways, like it might be different aspects or different like parts of me or different emotions, or like English is an emotional language for me too, as is Finnish. I wouldn't say that I only express my inner emotions in Finnish. And I don't claim to be like bilingual in the traditional sense, but I am of course bilingual. I can manage with English and Finnish equally. Well, Finnish is tricky, as we've heard. But
Och din svenska är mycket bra.
Svenska också, men det yeah, yeah, ambition, yeah. Anyway, no, but I think like this also sounds a bit like this monolingual ideal to me somehow, that we need one language to be fully ourselves, and the rest is kind of add-ons on that, or just parts of that, or slices. And I totally I understand that also. I feel jag känner mig lite obekväm när jag pratar svenska. Jag pratar tvångssvenska, måste jag säga. Jag är en av de som har gått i skolan i 70-talet, 80-talet. Och jag är en så lycklig tvångssvenska pratare. Men det är ändå det är inte bekvämt för mig. Men
jag skulle bara vilja lägga till att det är inte bara det här känslospråk och att svenska är mitt, utan det är också rent praktiskt. Om jag sitter i ett finskt möte så hinner jag inte. Jag kommer inte med de där snabba inpassen. Chitchat, finska är inte mitt chitchat-språk, det är svenska. Och hamnar jag i ett socialt sammanhang så jag har inte verktygen som jag har på svenska. Och det påverkar min personlighet och att jag upplevs på ett annat sätt. Det var ungefär det jag ville säga. Jag undrar om vi ska lämna lite utrymme åt publiken också.
Ja, vi har 10 minuter om det finns frågor. Are there any questions or comments?
Experiences, emotions.
Kiitos, tack, thank you for discussion. Ajattelin, että voisin jakaa jotain kokemuksia omista työyhteisöistäni. Olen saanut työskennellä akateemisissa työyhteisöissä, jotka ovat olleet kaksikielisiä, suomi ja ruotsi. Ja koen, että se on ollut hyvin hedelmällistä, että jokainen on saanut puhua omaa vahvinta kieltään. Ja samalla olen saanut oppia myös ruotsia, kun olen kuunnellut sitä. Ja kokouksissa meillä on ollut hyvin taitavia puheenjohtajia, jotka osaavat tiivistää tärkeimmät asiat niin, että kaikkia asioita ei toisteta. Ja tämmöisiä käytäntöjä toivoisin monille muillekin työpaikoille. Nyt työskentelen Itä-Suomen yliopistossa, joka on sitten taas yksikielisempi, että meillä on työkieli enemmän suomi, ja se on harmi, koska en pysty pitämään ruotsin kieltä samalla tavalla yllä, kuin olen pystynyt pitämään aikaisemmissa työpaikoissa Helsingin yliopistossa ja kotimaisten kielten keskuksessa. Että tällainen kommentti.
Want translations or are we?
No, I am
good. Yeah.
Anyone else?
While you're walking the mic, I think it's the idea of bilingual practices is really good, like also explicit bilingual practices. Yeah.
And what your story also makes me think of is that if we do nothing, it will be monolingual, right? And so you said you had this very skillful person there who was trying to. So it needs this intervention, right? Because we have structured our workplaces in a way that monolingualism is the norm. So it needs an interruption or a moderation or somebody who disrupts that. But I will also add one thing. We have talked a lot about the shame and the feelings of guilt and the difficulties and the policies and the pressure we have to do certain things a certain way and these well-established norms and how hard it is to break them. But I also want to say one other thing. This making a mess out of norms and introducing translingualism or more flexible multilingual practices is also really fun and really joyful, and I so it's not torture to do it. So I also want to give a bit of space of doing this work with passion and joy. Yeah.
Taina, you said that you're full in every language, and I hear that there are certain choices that you have to make, for example, in publishing, that you need to, you certainly publish in Swedish, but you also have to publish in English, and kind of little bits and parts of your commentaries lead me to ask, how about kind of internal hierarchies? Or kind of when you talk about personality change in terms of capacity. So how about kind of internal hierarchies or valuation of language, that this language is somehow important for these and these kind of, when Taina said that English is certainly a language of emotion as well, so it's like for me, there are parts of my life that exist only in English. And kind of thinking changes, but there are also, at least in my head, there are certain hierarchies of language, and also it gives kind of opens a little window of using power, kind of consciously also in terms of what language I choose. Do I want to show off and use this and that and the other word, or communicate in particular language? So kind of a little self-critical reflection, if you may, about kind of power and hierarchies and kind of conscious choices and valuation of language. Do you want to confess? Do you have something like that?
That's a really, can I just quickly start from like a really good question, because obviously I only claim to be sort of full in the way that I am full in those languages, and that's a very limited choice. That's basically Finnish and English, and to some extent Swedish. Even German is already, I'm a bit joking at the idea. Sorry that I looked at you when I said German.
When you said joking, yeah, no, it's fine.
But for me, the internal hierarchies, maybe I would talk about genres, like there are particular situations or particular cases where I would use either language, but I've also made the very conscious choice to publish academically both in Finnish and Swedish, for instance, Finnish and English, or also to publish non-academically in both languages. So I think that's like, I don't like the idea of using, like I said earlier, using English as the language of academic publishing and Finnish as the language of popular or political publishing. I would like to use both languages in both situations, and at some point I think it would be nice for me to write academically in Swedish too, so maybe we can set up some sort of, I can join the multilingual writing group in
great.
Swedish, yeah, because I think that would also be something that I would like to do.
Yeah,
definitely.
that would be lovely.
So definitely there are, like trying to answer briefly, definitely there are hierarchies, but it's also a conscious choice to try to dismantle those hierarchies a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But about power, I mean, this seminar has been mainly in Finnish, Swedish, and English. It's on the top hierarchy in Finland. We haven't, I don't think we've even touched, or perhaps just a little bit, about migrant languages or other languages. Mm-hmm. This has been trilingual, some German, and German is also a high-stake language. So, and here in this room, white people. Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about the example of the coffee table discussion, if you have an international researcher there, you could ask, yes, do you speak Finnish or do you speak English, Swedish? That discussion is relevant, but you could also ask, what is your mother tongue? And discuss around that mother tongue and show interest into their language or languages. And I think we sometimes miss there.
Oh, yeah. And I would even go further. I feel like in terms of multilingualism, this was really well done, I think, here. But if you even look like which languages are we not, and which people are we not including, and look at our department, that the Eurocentrism there is rampant. Like, what languages are we teaching? What languages do we think are worth being learned? It's not Urdu, it's not Arabic, it's not Swahili. You know, so I mean that says something about us too. So even if we're doing a really good job, we're still operating on a very small radar. And I think the idea would be to make that radar much, much broader. That would be the goal. But we have to start.
I asked my students at the course in English in discourse analysis what their languages were. I didn't ask which is your mother tongue, because that would be the monolingual norm. And some of them, they said 4, 5 languages or 4 languages. I'm trying to master Swedish as well. And they didn't make, I guess there wasn't a hierarchy, but they didn't say one of them was the priority language. They grew up with 3, 4 languages, and that's quite fantastic to do that.
This is the point where I always tell this anecdote about my father. Han var en så kallad krigsbarn. Han var född i 1939 tror jag. Och han var 3 år gammal när han flyttades till Sverige under kriget. Han glömde finskan, lärde sig svenska. Kom tillbaka när han var 5 eller 6. Han glömde svenskan och lärde igen finskan. Och sen gick han tillbaks för en sommar. Och svenskan kom tillbaka. Och efter det, han hade he had basically done that basic education. He was an electrician, but he basically thought that he could speak any Indo-European language based on that experience, because I think he had a very low threshold for gaining and losing languages in that. And I think I'm not saying that we should learn a language like that, that's not the point. But I think the point is to look at that own language category a bit. Like, what does it mean actually? Is it something that I feel like my interpretation is that he seriously tried to speak Dutch with Dutch people from that experience? Maybe there is something there to not to take languages too seriously either. We take languages really seriously. But maybe sometimes we should. I mean, I was really happy about your 40% example. Like, you didn't feel excluded. You got what we were talking about, and you could also play with the idea that you were participating in let's not take languages too seriously. That would be my takeaway.
May I? Short one, yeah. I come to think about what happened a long time ago when my daughters were small. This was 20, 30 years ago, and one of their friends came from Bulgaria, she was born in Sweden, but her parents were from Bulgaria, and the father left her at this birthday party for one of my daughters, and he said, there will be a problem. My father is coming to collect my daughter, and he doesn't speak Swedish, doesn't speak English, doesn't speak any language, and I know you, well, of course, except from Bulgaria, so you can't speak with him. Well, I tried to speak with him. I said, well, don't even try, but, well, he's interested in Esperanto, he said. So when he came and to collect my child, I used my very basic Spanish, and we communicated quite a lot. And he was happy that his Esperanto studying, that it was fruitful. He could use it for communicating at this birthday party, and I was happy to be able to communicate with him. We didn't have a very deep conversation, but still we talked with each other 5 or 10 minutes.
I think we have to finish here, so we will have some concluding words by Anna Slotte och Siv Björklund. Ja.
Tusen tack för den här väldigt intressanta paneldiskussionen. Vi ska då hålla några avslutande ord här. Mitt namn är Anna Slotte. Jag jobbar vid pedagogiska fakulteten Helsingfors universitet och är medlem i språkvetenskapliga nämnden vid Svenska litteratursällskapet och också medlem i vetenskapliga rådet där.
Och jag heter Siv Björklund, jag är professor i språkbad och flerspråkighet vid Åbo Akademi, men också här nu då i egenskap av medlem i språkvetenskapliga nämnden. Och vi har nu fått äran att säga några slutord. Vi säger ingenting om hur kloka det är, men vi har några slutord som vi har fått möjlighet att se på. And we have divided in such a way that I will try to give some thoughts, some different approaches to multilingualism. We have already seen during these 2 days that multilingualism is a very complex phenomenon. You can approach it from different angles. And I promise to do it now from a very broad theoretical frameworks. And from our title for the seminar, Akademisk flerspråkighet, frågetecken. Jag tycker att vi under de här 2 dagarna har sett att vi är inne i det som Stephen May har kallat multilingual turn. Vi har börjat lite på den vägen. Vi har sett redan under de här senaste åren, och också det här som vi har valt idag, att vi behöver gå in på den här flerspråkiga vägen. Det funkar inte längre med de här enspråkiga normerna, de enspråkiga institutionerna. Och redan att vi diskuterar en flerspråkighet vid universitet och högskolor visar att vi är på väg in i den här multilingual turn. Det som vi har tittat mycket på under de här 2 dagarna, jag funderar på att hur ser vi det när vi tittar på Ruijs teoriram om att vi kan se multilingualism as a resource, as a right or as a problem. Vi har varit inne på problematiseringen och vi har varit inne på praxis som alltså också som en resurs, som en resurs. Men jag tycker att vi har lite saknat den här diskussionen om right, multilingualism as a right. Och jag tror att det är viktigt att ta upp den i en institutionell omgivning. Och jag tror att Finland är på rätt väg där man bland annat då i läroplanerna säger att alla barn, alla elever i Finland, de ska ha rätt att bli liksom bekanta med flerspråkighet och kunna finna sig i en flerspråkig värld. Det gäller inte bara alltså våra barn som kommer utomlands ifrån, utan det gäller också alla vi som är födda finskspråkiga, svenskspråkiga, samiskspråkiga som har vuxit upp i Finland. Så det här med multilingualism as a right, så tycker jag är väldigt viktigt. Sen när det gäller den här universitetskontexten, kommer att tänka på Spolskis tre delar som man tycker är väldigt viktiga: ideologi, praxis, men också management. Och jag tror att management är väldigt centralt när vi går in på den här institutionella kontexten. Jag tror att det är också värt att fundera vidare på. Vad betyder det? Sen ännu ett perspektiv, att vi har pratat mycket om det här med enspråkighet visavi flerspråkighet. Men jag ska också vilja utvidga den diskussionen till vad vi lite var inne på paneldiskussionen här idag. Flerspråkighet visavi flerspråkighet. Ett nytt teoretiskt ramverk när man tittar på sådana här dominanta språkkonstellationer, dominant language constellations. När vi har sett på det institutionell kontext så är det just de här 3 språken, finska, svenska, engelska, som hela tiden upprepas, både på den individuella nivån men också på den institutionella nivån. Till exempel då utbildning i Finland. Och det här är nog en privilegierad dominerande språkkonstellation. Vad gör vi med alla de andra språken som syntes också i det föredrag som vi har fått höra här nu, som Åsa nämnde och Paulina nämnde också, som Johanna här. Vad gör vi med alla de andra språken som finns där? Det dyker upp både som på individuell nivå men också som en institutionell resurs. Och sen överlåter jag ordet här till Anna som lite mera går in på ett sådant här fall hur man kan jobba praktiskt.
Tack. Ja, jag ska utgående från Sivs teoretiska ramverk här berätta lite om vad som är på gång vid Helsingfors universitet och särskilt vid pedagogiska fakulteten, men nog hela universitetet. Det var sades här under föregående presentation, Johanna sa att what would the dean say, eller någon fråga så. Och vår dekan vid pedagogiska fakulteten, Johanna Mäkelä heter hon, så hon är ett praktexempel på användning av 3 språk i många av sina anföranden. Vid välkomsttal, på fester, men vid möten och så vidare. Hon använder svenska, finska och engelska flytande efter varandra utan att upprepa allting. Och man förstår vad man förstår. Det är en praktik hon då tar till när hon som också bottnar i det helt enkelt i den policy som vi har. För det finns nämligen år 2025 är ett temaår vid Helsingfors universitet där man lyfter fram flerspråkighet i universitetsvardagen, och det finns väl utvecklade riktlinjer, guidelines for language awareness in the university, kielitietoisen yliopistoarjen ohjeet, som uppmuntrar till användning av flera språk i olika sammanhang, i undervisning, på möten, och det gäller personal och det gäller studenter. Och det finns väldigt, det ligger öppna på nätet, och det här försöker vi nu föra fram extra mycket just nu. Vi har en språkmedveten höst vid pedagogiska fakulteten med olika utmaningar. Och där vi också tar fram det här som Siv nämnde om flera språk. Vi har på gång nu en sån här en tavla helt konkret i en korridor där man kan visualisera de språk man gärna skulle vilja ta med till fakulteten, vilka man kan och vilka man vill lära sig. Så det här med språkrättigheter handlar ju både om rättigheten förstås att kunna använda sitt språk, olika språk, men det handlar också om rättigheten att lära sig olika språk som vi talar om. Och det handlar då också inte enbart om den som talar utan om den som lyssnar, som vi har hört många bra exempel här och perspektiv som lyftes fram i de tidigare inslagen idag och igår också. Också det här med känslor nämns där, och jag tycker en sak som kanske inte har sagts idag som jag kan ge som exempel, så handlar också om de här liksom känslorna som man själv liksom de egna känslorna, att vara empatisk mot sig själv också när man använder andra språk, eller om man deltar i en undervisning som går på ett annat språk än ett starkt språk eller egna första språket. Att vara empatisk till dig i förhållande till dig själv också. Du får gärna fylla på om du har något med det. Jag bläddrar i mitt dokument.
Vi hör att vi har jobb framöver, många år framöver, att på det sättet främja flerspråkigheten på olika sätt inom just det akademiska. Och vi får ju komma ihåg att vi inte lever i den där bubblan. Vi har individerna, vi har samhället runt om oss som också vi behöver samarbeta med för att det ska fungera.
Och det här med makt som också, power som är med i det hela, är nog väldigt viktigt att uppmärksamma, och vad man kan göra som ledare till exempel vid en diskussion, som en chef i ett sammanhang under ett möte, att lyfta fram språkanvändning och att också tänka på de här skillnaderna. Det är en sak, man kan liksom diskutera på vilket språk kan du förstå, på vilket språk kan du hänga med här under diskussionen, på vilka språk är du beredd att delta i diskussionen. Och förstås alla de här praktiska exemplen med att ha stödjande text och att sammanfatta på ett annat språk och att hjälpas åt, den här shared work och language work, kielityö som vi hörde om. Det är mycket som är egentligen ganska små saker som man kan göra, som kan betyda väldigt mycket.
Att inte fastna i de här ramarna. Riktigt intressant här på paneldiskussionen att det handlar ju om det här med bilingual eller multilingual practices, att det är helt enkelt att ju mer man gör det, desto vanare blir man med det. Det att börja någonstans, alla känner sig obekväma, det ska man göra. Efter ett år eller så är man mycket mer bekväm redan. Efter 5 år så fungerar det. Liksom. Men det krävs att man kör igång det där initiativet.
Och det handlar om jämlikhet väldigt långt också, och rättigheter, identitet och makt. Det är väldigt mycket med, och det här behöver vi uppmärksamma. Så det explicita talet om språk och talet om språkval är väldigt centralt.
Och vi hoppas ju att slutmålet ska bli en inkluderande flerspråkighetskontext vid alla våra universitet och högskolor.
Ja, och det här med glädje som lyftes fram i slutet, och liksom humor, och att inte ta det så allvarligt, det tycker jag också är väldigt viktigt.
Och då tror jag att vi börjar vara ute med vad gäller tiden. On ollut todella antoisaa seurata ja osallistua seminaariin. Kiitoksia kaikille. Och vi tackar speciellt våra kollegor i språkvetenskapliga nämnden som har hållit i det här programmet.
Och särskilt då arbetsgruppen, Åsa Palviainen och Henrik Ram och Hanna Lappalainen som har planerat det här symposiet.
Och naturligtvis också alla vi SLS som har Nina och Sofia som har varit här, men också alla andra som har förberett det här under en lång tid. Vad ska vi säga? Vad borde vi säga? Jag satt och funderade. Åtminstone kan vi säga vielen dank, merci beaucoup.
Vielen dank, ja.
Och kiitoksia och tack och thank you. Och kanske vi borde ha lite koreanska också, men jag har inte titta på det nu. Men
kan någon bidra med koreanska?
Koreanska tack på det.
Nej. Ja. I tankarna är koreanskan med oss. Tusen tack allihopa.
Jag vill också tacka för Svenska litteratursällskapets del för det här jätteintressanta seminariet. Så ska jag avsluta med lite bokutdelning här, men det kanske jag gör utan mikrofon. Tack så mycket.